everyone, and welcome to week 4 of Pat Sloan's Sew Along Summer Camp. The topic for this week is camp food, and as a child I remember whenever we went camping we always had damper. Damper is a kind of bread. It's basically just made with flour and water, and it's cooked in the dying embers of the fire. When you eat it when it's fresh, it is absolutely delicious, but if you leave it to go cold, it can be a weapon. So, if you haven't done so already, jump over to Pat's website, ilovetomakequilts.com, download this week's block pattern, come back here, and we'll show you how it's done. The cutting instructions in the pattern are for making 2 at a time half square triangles. This week, I'm going to show you 2 alternate methods to make this block using 8 at a time half square triangles and flying geese with partial seams. If you need instructions for the half square triangles as per the pattern, there is a separate video that I have put up this week called Half Square Triangles 2 at a Time. As I pointed out in the introduction, I'll be making the half square triangles this time 8 at a time. To do this, we start with a large square of both our light and dark fabric. For the medium fabric and the center square, cut as per the pattern directions. Here you can see me placing a diagonal line from corner to corner in both directions. In this instance, my square is 10.5 inches big. It could be 10.25. That gives a little bit of trim room, but I like to up it so that I know I can trim down to my required size afterwards. Once the diagonal lines are drawn, place it with your dark fabric. And I like to pin here because the fabric is rather large and you don't want it to shift on the way to the machine, but it's not a problem if it does. Then at the machine, we're going to stitch 1/4 inch either side of both drawn lines. Now that our blocks are sewn together, we need to trim them apart. Because we started with a 10.5 inch square, we're going to slice it at the 5.25 inch mark vertically, and then the 5.25 inch mark horizontally, and finally we'll cut on both of the diagonal lines, and this will yield us 8 half square triangle units. Take all 8 units over to your ironing surface and press to the dark side. Now we need to square these units to our desired measurement of 4.5 inches. I do them 2 at a time as per previous videos, but you can do them 1 at a time. I place the diagonal from a square ruler on the seam line, ensure that there is enough fabric inside our measurement of 4.5 inches, trim on 2 sides, rotate, repeat. Do this with all 8 half square triangle units. Now we need to add a sew and flip to the light side of 4 of the half square triangles we've just created. You'll see here that I've drawn a line from corner to corner diagonally, and I'm placing it and pinning it on one. This is going to be done using the traditional sew and flip method. On the other 3, I'm going to use the folded corner clipper technique I shared with you last week. Over at the sewing machine, on the traditional method, remember we are sewing 1 thread width away from our drawn line to ensure that we maintain squareness. And on the ones that I've already trimmed the corner off, I sew with a scant 1/4 inch to also ensure we maintain squareness. Following the method for the traditional sew and flip, we fold the piece over to ensure squareness, making sure that the edges match on the front and the back with no overlap before trimming off the extra 2 layers underneath at approximately 1/4 inch. You can do this with your ruler and blade, but here I am just using scissors. Now all pieces will be pressed towards the darker of the 2 fabrics. Now it's time to lay out our block before sewing it together. We're basically doing a large 9 patch. I start from the middle, place the little legs on the friendship star, and then put in the corners, making sure you've got the correct orientation as per the pattern. As per 9 patch construction, sew down the 2 seams first, and then sew across the horizontal seams. Lay your pieces back out ready to sew the next vertical seam. You will note here I made a slight error. After clipping for nesting the seams, I sewed the 2 pieces together incorrectly. Hello, Jack. Now that that's fixed, place all the blocks back on the design board and continue construction of the 9 patch, flipping the remaining pieces over to sew this last vertical seam. Note here on the bottom, I'm going to clip the seam and flick it to nest it before sewing. One final check to see if any of the other pieces need to nest before sewing the vertical seams. With those vertical seams done, it's now time to do the horizontal seam. And to make the pieces nest here, on the top row I pressed out from the center, and in the middle row I pressed into the center and out from the center again on the bottom row, ensuring that all pieces will nest with our horizontal seams, as you can see here, pressing towards the center once these are done. The final horizontal seam is now sewn, once again pressing towards the center. But to facilitate this, I'm just going to place a slight clip where you can see me doing that here, and this will ensure that the block will lay as flat as possible. You'll notice here that I didn't get perfect points on all of these, but like a few people have said in the past, and I agree with, finished is better than perfect. I'm going to flip the block over now so that you can look at how I've pressed those seams. And this block is now done. When I make flying geese, I like to use the Creative Grid's Ultimate Flying Geese tool. With this method, you make 4 at a time and trim down to the final size. In this instance, we need a final finished size of 4 by 8. So it is actually the largest that this tool will make, and it tells you that you need to cut 1 large square of the unit that will be the geese, and 4 smaller squares for the pieces that would be the sky. And you can see me here drawing a diagonal line from corner to corner on the 4 sky pieces. We then grab the large geese fabric and we lay 2 of these blocks across the diagonal of the large block, and you will see that the drawn line down the center makes 1 continuous line across. We then take this to the sewing machine and stitch 1/4 of an inch either side of that line the whole way down. Now that that's sewn, we need to slice down the middle and then press the little triangles up to make a heart shape. From there, we place 1 of the other squares with the line drawn as shown, and then again sew 1/4 inch either side of the drawn line. Once again, slice on the drawn line to separate these units and press the little corners out to finish the flying geese. Repeat on all 4. Now it's time to trim. Grab the Ultimate Flying Geese tool, and on the chart that I showed you before, which is in the top left corner, it tells you which letter you are following for the lines on the trimming. Place the required line inside the triangle and trim 2 sides. Turn the block around, lining up that same lettered line again on the outside. In this instance, it's the whole size of the ruler, making sure the triangle lines up as well, and trim the final two sides. I will show you after a method for trimming down if you do not have this flying geese tool. Next, we need to add the sew and flip to the correct corner of the flying geese unit. I've put the block diagram here to show you that when the unit is upside down, it goes to the bottom right hand side. You can do this via the traditional method with drawing a line and sewing just to the outside of that line, or using the folded corner clipper method that I showed you last week. Do this to all 4 flying geese units. After sewing that seam, flip to the outside and press all 4. Next, we will construct the block. To construct the block using this method, we must do a partial seam. The partial seam will be done along this edge so that we create one continuous edge for the next piece to be sewn on. We will start sewing approximately halfway down the block, leaving an open end. As shown here, I have stitched from just about halfway, leaving that side open, and now when we press this towards the center, or the path of least resistance, we now have a complete straight edge to join our next block on, then the next, and finally we will finish that partial seam. Okay, we've sewn all 3 sides on now, and it's time to close that final partial seam. As you can see, we now have a complete edge to lay this block upon, and you just line it up, pin to match that middle, and sew the seam down and overlap about 1/4 of an inch on those stitches, and it is done. We're going to press the block out now, and you'll notice in those fast sections that I had some clipping. I will show you that once I've pressed this down. To trim your flying geese without the tool, you can use a standard ruler. The bottom edge is still flat, and we know that the overall width we want is 8.5 inches. So line up the 4 1/4 mark at the point of the triangle, allowing 1/4 inch above that, and then make sure that any line on the ruler is straight against the bottom of the block, and trim 2 sides. Flip the block around, place the 4 1/2 inch mark and the 8 1/2 inch mark along the edges, and trim the final 2 sides. And Bob, once again, is your uncle. Okay everyone, thanks for joining me again this week, and hopefully all of my hints and tips have been helpful. I know this week was a long one. See you all again next week, and if you haven't done so already, like the video, comment, and subscribe. Ciao.